Hello, it is Tuesday, June 9th, and it is 8:19 p.m. I guess this is the grand opening of Illi's library, so thank you for being here with me. And I feel like I have wanted to open this library for so long, and I tried so many times, I think over the course of the past 6 to 7 years, trying to start this again and again with the perfect timing, the perfect book, the perfect setting. I just never found a place for it. And the past few days, I have read more than I have, I feel like, in the past 4 years, or at least consistently. And I've noticed that in doing so, I just feel like I'm a version of myself that isn't as anxious. And even though my actual life in regards of to work and my personal relationships, I don't feel like anything has changed, but mentally I just feel a lot more at peace just because I have somehow found the time to read for at least like an hour the past couple of days. And I just wanted to know if it is because of the reading or if it's because I am just going through my cycle, and I don't know what it could be, but I definitely like this version of myself, and I wanted to have a space and time to keep track of all of the books and shows and movies and music, anything that you would typically be able to find in a library. And I just wanted to see how the stories that I am consuming affects how I see the world and how I see myself, because I feel like in my life there are so many relationships to manage, there are so many tasks to manage, but reading is one of the few activities that I can actually do and enjoy by myself. And so in some ways, for me, reading kind of feels like the thing that I allow myself to have just for me. And even though I'm kind of sharing it right now, I think really more than anything, it is just for me, and just for me to remember my life through the stories that I've lived. And so I figured, why not today? I feel like there are a million things that I have to do. My dishes are still half unwashed. I have laundry that I've said that I was going to do for the past week, but I haven't done. I'm literally sleeping on a towel on top of my pillow because the pillowcase has been in the laundry bin for the past week. And that's just how I have been living my life the past few days. And normally I think I would have felt kind of bad and kind of guilty about just not having my life together. But because I've been at least able to have it together enough to read, I somehow just don't feel that bad. And I feel like I'm just happier. And so I wanted to share what I have been reading so far this week. So it is Tuesday, so let me back up and start maybe Monday. I like starting the week on Mondays. So Monday, yesterday, was actually the first day that I visited the library in my school. during break time after lunch. And so I had never gone into the library before because every time I passed it, it was always locked, and I wasn't really sure when it was exactly open or who was in charge of the library. But actually, a week prior, I was able to go inside because one of the classes that I had dropped in on had a visit to the library, and they were just sitting there reading for like the entire class session. And so I picked up volume 1 of Demon Slayer because there aren't really that many English books in the library to begin with. But I think they had Demon Slayer like volumes 1 through 23. And so I just picked it up and I started reading it. And so, of course, I couldn't take it out of the school. And so I kind of forgot about it. But yesterday, I was just walking around after lunch, and I realized that after lunch, during break time for about like 20 minutes, they opened the library and students just work the library desk, and you can go in there and read if you want. So I walked in and I picked up volume 1 of Demon Slayer, and I finished it because it's really, really short. And so I think I only actually had the last chapter of it left. So I was able to finish it during break time, and that was the first book that I finished this week. And in doing so, I felt quite content and satisfied. And after I got home from work, I read The Edge of Collapse, I believe, by Kyla Stone. And this is an apocalyptic book set almost near present day. I think the setting is supposed to be like 2024-ish, and supposedly an EMP attack happened on the United States, and EMP stands for electromagnetic pulse. And so this is caused by, it could either be caused by a solar flare, or it could be like a targeted nuclear attack. And so in this world, I think they're leaning towards the idea that it was a targeted nuclear attack. And after this hit, it took out all of the electronic systems and devices in essentially all of the US except for parts of Alaska and Hawaii. And so imagine all cell phones are useless. Anything that runs on electricity is essentially done. Anything digital, gone. So cars were undrivable, and streetlights were going out, hospitals were going down, even places with like backup generators had very limited use if they depended on certain kinds of digital signal. I don't know too much about the science about this, but just imagine that essentially everything is down and everything has to be manual. And in this book, there is a woman named Hannah, and even though the world is like going to shit, it is actually a blessing for her because she has been trapped and locked up for the past 5 years. And she was kidnapped by this horrible person who did horrible things to her. I will say, if you're not about reading books with heavy descriptions of abuse, don't read this book. This book is not for you. Imagine, you know the movie Room with, what's her name? The person who played Miss Marvel. Is that her name? Wow, I can't remember her name right now. But if you know what that movie is about, and you know that you aren't able to watch that movie, maybe this book would not be good for you. I haven't seen the movie, but you can imagine like what happens if you're a woman trapped by a psychotic man for the past 5 years. So anyway, Hannah has been trapped, and she is pregnant, and she's pretty far along in her pregnancy. But after the EMP attack, the electric gate that has been locking her in is unlocked. And so she uses this opportunity to escape. But the only problem is, well, that is not the only problem, but a huge, unfortunate circumstance for her is that this EMP attack hit, I think, on New Year's Eve. And so it is like the dead of winter. She is in Michigan, not quite the UP, but like pretty close. And if you know anything about Midwest winters, especially if you are from Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, you know that they are horrendous. They're so cold. I would, for one, would not survive a day, pregnant or not. I would not survive without any kind of heating. And so she, thankfully, because she grew up in Michigan, she has had a lot of experience in surviving in the wilderness because her parents used to take them camping and skiing and things like that. And so she has some basic survival skills. So she tries her best to gather up supplies and escape this cabin that she has been trapped in. And I haven't read really any books that are in apocalyptic settings, or even dystopians. I think the only books that I've ever read in kind of like a dystopian setting was the first book in the Hunger Games, the first book in the Maze Runner series, the Knife of Never Letting Go trilogy, which I loved, and Station 11, which I did not love. I feel like, honestly, like, you can count them on one hand. Those are all of the books that I've ever read that is set in kind of a dystopian genre. And so I would say this is pretty out there of a book for me. But recently I have been watching a lot of Sunny Kim's videos, and this series was mentioned in one of her videos regarding slow burn or something along the lines. And so I figured, why not? I think something that I want to try to do this year and for the rest of my life is to branch out and try to read as many genres as I can before making a judgment about them. I think that's probably a general thing that I want to try to do in life, is just that I feel like up until this point in my life, I have been a really judgmental person, whether or not I come across that way to others. I feel like deep in my heart of hearts, I am so quick to make judgments about people, things, books that I have no deep level of like knowledge. And I think that that's just unfair to whatever it is that I'm experiencing. And I think it's unfair to myself as well, because what if my judgment prevented me from reading the best book of my life, or prevented me from making a great friend, just because of these biases that I made up in my mind. And so I told myself that it's okay to have opinions as long as I give that thing a chance first. And so before I write off the entire dystopian genre and books about the apocalypse, I was like, let me just try one. And so actually before this book, I read Chaos Rising, which is kind of like a prequel. And the prequel actually is about another character introduced in the book that you don't really see until a couple chapters later. And so I'm really glad that I read the prequel, because I think if that prequel didn't really set up this character, it would have been so hard to care for him or even understand his motive for doing what he does. So what I think what's really interesting about The Edge of Collapse is, even though it's written in, I want to say like third person POV, you still have these chapters that follow different characters in the book, and Hannah is the majority of the chapters, but you also follow two other characters, Pike and Liam. And if you don't want any spoilers, you can stop here, but they're not really that spoilery, because the moment the chapter comes, you kind of understand who they are. But Pike is actually Hannah's captor, and I don't know if this is normal, but I think it's very rare that I read books in which the antagonist is featured as one of the POVs, and so I found this to be just refreshing. And maybe if I read more into the genre, I will find that perhaps it's just like a thing that happens. I don't know, but it is my first time experiencing it, and so I was definitely intrigued. And even though you are following him, like, I don't think the author makes you sympathetic towards him at all. Like, even though you are following him, I think the more you follow him, the more you're just like disgusted by his behavior. And so I thought it was interesting that we do get this perspective. So he is one of the characters, and I think it adds to the suspense as well, because as you follow him, you realize how smart he is and how just ruthless he is. And so when you get closer to like tracking down Hannah through Pike's POV, I think that aids in the building of the suspense in the novel. And so that was really interesting. And then the other POV that you get is Liam, who is an ex-military soldier who was featured in the prequel novel, and he comes across Hannah as she is trying to escape and ends up deciding to help her, despite, you know, the logical part of him saying that he'll survive, you know, or have a greater chance of survival if he just goes off on his own. But he decides to stop and help Hannah, and so he gets wrapped up in her escape. So he is the other POV that you follow. And I think knowing that this book is part of like a 6-7 book series makes it a lot easier to accept the way that this book ended, because I will say the ending was like so abrupt. I feel like we kind of ended in like the middle of a book. Like, it just feels like the cliffhanger. I was like, wait, what? And then I literally I was reading it on my Kindle app, and I saw that I had like 100 pages or like maybe 50 pages left. And so I was like, oh yeah, like we're gonna follow them until, you know, they're safe or like something. But then they're not in like immediate danger, but they're not like completely safe yet. But then the book just ended, and I was like, wait, what? And the rest of the pages were just like excerpts from the author's other novels. And so I was like, oh my god, what happened? And so I, of course, immediately got like the rest of the books, and without spoiling anything, the rest of the books obviously introduces more characters, and so realizing that the first book was really it just felt like a longer prequel essentially to the rest of the story, or it just kind of felt like part one of a story. Like it didn't feel like a complete story on its own, but obviously knowing that the series is finished and the story is finished, it made me feel a lot better. So I didn't actually have any personal issues with that. But eventually I gave it, I think, a 3 out of 5 or like a 3.5 out of 5 or something like that, because it was definitely a page turner. I was intrigued, and despite the limited characters that were in this book, I felt the suspense and I enjoyed reading it. And so it was an easy read, a quick read, and it was very engaging. So is it the best thing I've ever read in my life? Not really. Does it kind of have a lower score because of the lack of humor? Maybe, but I think that is just a personal preference of mine. I think humor is a huge factor in terms of my personal enjoyment of books, and so that oftentimes affects my rating a lot. But overall, I think if you are able to have the capacity to read about abuse and torture and violence, then perhaps you would be interested in this book. If not, it's totally okay to just, pass it up. You don't need to read this in your life. I think you'll be just fine without it. But personally, I was really surprised that I enjoyed it. And so I'm excited to read the rest of the books, but I think I kind of need a break from that suspenseful world. So I decided to look into my Libby checkouts and see what I need to read before the books are due. And so I was in the middle of A Song to Drown Rivers by let me see. What is the name of this author? Wait, hold on. Oh, wait, there it is. By Anne Leung. And if you don't know, this book is inspired by Chinese legend, based on Xixi, who is one of the 4 ancient beauties of China. So in Chinese culture and history, we have a very well-known legend of like 4 historical figures who are said to be like the most beautiful women in Chinese history, or at least like ancient Chinese history. And they all have their own unique traits, obviously, and their importance in culture and history. But this particular book is based on one of the women named Xixi, who her lore is that she was supposedly so beautiful that when she went to the river to do like the washings and stuff, the fish would like see her reflection and be so enraptured by her beauty that they would forget how to swim and sink to the bottom of the river. And same thing for the geese that are flying in the sky. Like they would see her and they would be so captivated that they would forget how to fly and they would fall out of the sky. And her beauty was said to be so amazing that the moon would go into hiding, like, whether it's being eclipsed or by the clouds or just hidden in general, and the flowers were to be shamed by her beauty. And so there's like a very famous Chinese saying that describes all of the above, which is what is it? I think it was like 沉鱼落雁闭月羞花. And so yeah, but she is supposedly, I think, just like a commoner living in a peasant village, and word of her beauty traveled across the land, and the particular kingdom that she lives in, the kingdom of Yue, one of the political / military advisors to the king came up with the idea that they should use her as a spy and train her and then send her to their like rival kingdom so that she can distract that king and kind of persuade him to make political and military decisions that would benefit their own kingdom. And so essentially that is her story. And so far as I'm reading this novel, that is essentially what happens, except that it's of course filled in with details by the author's like imagination. And I think the lore itself is already interesting enough. But as I'm reading the story, I'm currently 46% of the way in, and I feel like I just don't care about the main characters. So like Xi and the advisor dude who's like training her, Feng Li, and or Fen Li, I forgot his name. Oh my gosh. Okay, maybe it's Fen Li. Yeah, I don't really remember which characters his name is written in, so I don't remember which intonations his name is. But anyway, like these two are supposed to be endgame, I think, but Xi doesn't really have a personality, and neither does the dude, because the dude is kind of just like cold and only thinks about fulfilling his duty, so he doesn't like really talk much. But even through their interactions, I don't really feel that they like are interested in each other or care about each other or are attracted to each other, except for hearing like Shishu's like monologue talking about how she wishes like he would notice her more. But I think, like, honestly, I forgot that the story was written in first person because it's just so hard to relate to her because her voice isn't very strong. And so I wasn't really that interested in the story. But at 46% right now, we kind of just meet the emperor of the rival kingdom, and he's only been around for like the past 10 pages, I think, and already he is the most complex character in this book, and I am literally so interested in seeing how he turns out. And I hope that he has a good ending, because right now I feel like he is just the most alive character in this book right now. And I almost, like, I don't care who she ends up with, but I almost don't want her to end up with this guy, because I'm like, why would somebody with no personality deserve somebody with a personality, even though I think he's supposed to be kind of like the antagonist, but maybe he is also kind of like a red herring, and the author is using this to like rewrite history a little bit, or just give her, imagination and spin on the story. but he is so interesting that I'm kind of like, I think it would have been a stronger novel if we just moved aside from focusing on Shishu the girl to focusing on, you know, the rival kingdom, because at the end of the day, kingdoms are at war. It's always like the regular people who are caught up in the middle. So I think it would have been so interesting if we got maybe a different perspective, where imagine just another like palace servant, or maybe even one of the concubines from the rival kingdom, and it's like this version of like Shishu's story told through that perspective. I think that would have been so interesting to see. But no, we are stuck here with Shishu and her lack of personality. And we're gonna find out how this version of the story ends. But I think despite my like lack of interest, I will still finish this book because it is an easy read. And I think I need to stick by my idea of not passing judgment until I finish the book. But I will say that time is limited, so I also don't want to limit myself to not allowing myself to DNF books. So maybe I will tell myself, if I am 75% in, I still just don't care about the ending, maybe then maybe then I will DNF it and then just look up the ending somewhere else. Or maybe I will see if there's an audiobook version and see if I can listen to the rest on audio. But currently I'm just kind of like, it's a bit of a drag, and I don't want books that are a drag to put me into a reading slump. So I think the plan is, for the rest of today, I will try to read a little bit more before I go to bed, and then tomorrow, if I feel like it's not really doing it for me, I will limit my reading time to my work commute, and then when I am at home, I will allow myself to start a new book. And I think that's a pretty good system, because when I'm commuting, I'm like bored either way, so why not at least be bored in getting through an average book. But yeah, that's another book that I'm reading. And the final book that I am reading, which I just started today, was The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, because an overarching like goal of mine is to read all the books that I can possibly access via the library system or some kind of I don't know, like open access library. I want to read all the books that I can that are on the Newbery list. And so if you're unfamiliar, I think it's the John M. Newbery Medal is awarded to a book that has made an impact in children's literature every year. And so a medal is awarded every year, and then among that year there are also honorary like medals awarded for other books that have made an impact. But like, to receive a Newbery Medal means like you are like the book of the year for children's literature. And I believe this is within like the American literary realm. And so all the books on this list are English language books, I believe. Correct me if I am wrong. It has been a while since somebody has explained how the nominees and finalists for this award works. But I think compared to other literary awards, this one matters a lot to me because I was introduced to the world of books when I was a kid, and I feel like the books that you read as a child could potentially impact you for the rest of your life, whether or not the rest of your life includes reading, or whether or not the rest of your life is actually directly related to those books. But I do really, at least for me, believe that because I read books as a child, those books changed the trajectory of the rest of my life, and I think I would be a very different person, and I would be in a very different place. I would be just mentally, physically, emotionally not who I am today, and I am so proud and happy and grateful to say that despite my life not being what I imagined, and despite me not being who I want to be yet, at the end of every day, I am so grateful and happy that I am me, and no matter what happens in my life, I don't think there ever was a moment that I ever wished to be anybody else, even in my lowest of lows. And I think I truly believe that I owe it all to the books that I've read as I was growing up. I feel like as much as I love my family and my friends and everybody in my support system, of course they really helped me get to where I am today. But when they weren't around, when it was the middle of the night and I had nobody to turn to, the stories and the characters from the books that I read were the things that stayed by me and held me together. And so I just truly feel like I owe so much of my life to the books from my childhood, and that is why books that are written for children are meant, to help be that thing for children really matter to me. And that's why books that have received the Newbery Medal, I regard them with so much, I don't even know. I have a very high regard for those books, and of course I understand that maybe I might not personally enjoy every book that has received that medal. Again, it's about reading them and then making that decision for myself. And so far, every book that I have read that has received the medal, I have enjoyed. Even if I didn't love them, I think they were at least a 4 or 5 star book. And so it hasn't failed me yet, so we'll see how the rest are. But I actually have been wanting to read The Graveyard Book for almost a decade. I think I first heard about it when I was still in university, and Neil Gaiman wrote Stardust, which was adapted into a film in 2007, and I think that might be one of my favorite films of all time. I think even if it's not my favorite, it probably is one of my most rewatched films of all time. And I think it's so interesting because even though I loved the movie so much, I tried so hard to like the book, and I read it twice and even upon a second reading, I just could not get into it. And so I tried to read, I believe it was Neverwhere that he wrote, and I think I read it with a friend, and we both agreed that it just wasn't for us. And so that kind of put me off Neil Gaiman's books for a really long time. And obviously, a few years ago, the huge scandal regarding his personal life broke out, which put me off even more. But this past year, I found the Graveyard Book in one of the local used bookstores here. And living in Japan, the English books are limited and the libraries are even more limited, so I'll take what I can get. So when I saw it in the bookstore, I think it was only like 300 yen, so like $2 something, like maybe not even $2. I was like, why not? So I got it, and it's been on my shelf for a while, but just last night I decided to take it out because I wanted to read something at school, and I wanted something that was school appropriate. So I'm not gonna be bringing like ACOTAR into school, even if the kids can't read it. But I do not want to explain to them what that book is about. And so even though I have a lot of other books on my shelves, I was like, you know what? This week I just felt like I had the courage to try something new. So I was like, okay, instead of pulling out a book that I have read before, let's just try this one and see how it goes. And I'm so glad I did, because last night I was sitting there, and I think I have like the 10th anniversary version, and so there is a foreword by Margaret Atwood. And unfortunately for me, I don't think I've ever actually read anything by Margaret Atwood, but I know she is a very prolific author. And so I was reading what she wrote, and immediately I could just tell, I'm like, oh my god, I feel like it's been so long since I've read something by someone who can actually write. And even though, of course, this is not a book by her, just reading her thoughts and opinions about this book, I just felt like my eyes have been cleansed, and I was like, oh, this is what it's like to read words by an author who clearly understands her craft. Like, you just know when you read writing that is so good that, like I said, it's not even a book, it's just her opinions and thoughts on a book, and it was only a few pages long, but it was such good writing that I am definitely going to look into her books, and I want to add her books to my list of read books. But anyway, that was a promising start. So I was actually so intrigued after reading her foreword that I put it in my backpack, and I told myself that this was going to be my break time book. And so at work, I get an hour-long break, including my lunchtime, and there is 20 minutes of rest for the students as well. So after I discovered the library, I was just like, you know what? If I read in the teacher's office, then I feel like that's kind of an open invitation for conversation. And while I really do enjoy talking to the other teachers and the other staff members, I'm like, I just need 15 to 20 minutes of uninterrupted, guilt-free, quiet time, preferably with a book. And so I put it in my bag, and I went to the library after lunch today, and I started reading the Graveyard Book. And I have to say what you will about Neil Gaiman's personal life and character, say what you will about his novels for adults, but this book had one of the most captivating openings I've read in maybe the past 4 years. And I haven't read a lot in the past 4 years, but like I think many books are good because you remember how like they held your attention in general, you know, throughout the book and the story and maybe the characters. But few books have openings that just pull you in. And I just know that even if I don't enjoy the rest of the book, I will never forget this opening scene for as long as I have a clear and functioning memory. It is just like, I'm trying to think of other books that like pulled me in that I can clearly remember, like the very opening scene. And I always go back to The Westing Game. And I believe it starts off with, the sun sets in the west, but Sunset Towers faces east. And I think that in of itself is just such a captivating opening line. And immediately I am imagining myself on some lake, on some beach, I don't know, somewhere near water. It is dusk and the sun's gonna go down. And I'm just imagining the reflection of the setting sun on the water onto a tall apartment complex of some sort, except the apartment complex obviously is facing the other way. And so to this day, I love that book. And I also want to say that it was a Newbery Medal winner, and that is one of the books that I remember the openings of. I remember the opening of A Wrinkle in Time because I've read it so many times. But like even other books that I absolutely adore with my whole heart, like Percy Jackson, and The Princess Bride, and Cosmos, what I talk about when I talk about running, Frindle. Like there are so many books that I really adore, but like if you asked me what their opening scene was, I couldn't tell you. I just know that I love the books in general. But oh my goodness, I will remember the opening scene to The Graveyard Book, like I said, for as long as I have a functioning memory. Because first of all, I think if you told me this book was any other genre, I would have been like, okay, maybe that's fair. But I went in fully knowing that this is a children's book. And so for a children's book to have such a dark and ominous opening, I was beyond like shook. Like I almost gasped out loud reading this book in the library. And a student even approached me. He was like, "Oh, Sensei, are you studying?" And I was like, no, my mind is being blown right now, except he wouldn't understand what that meant. So I was just like, no, I'm reading for fun. But I like wanted to like grab anybody around me and shake them. I'm like, do you know what I am experiencing right now? Like, I wish their English was good enough so that I could read it out loud to them. And then we would just be 20 people all like being mind blown together, except it was just me and I had no one to turn to. So another reason as to why I needed to open my own library so that I can come and just share my excitement with whoever is around. But yeah, so those are all the books that I am reading right now. I have other shows and like songs as well, but if I talk anymore, I feel like I won't even have a voice for tomorrow at work, so I will stop here. But I will hopefully be back either tomorrow or sometime later this week to update you on how the books are going, and if I don't finish any books, then maybe I will talk to you about the shows that I'm watching / the songs that I've been listening to recently. But yeah, okay. I will be back another day this week. Mark my words. And thank you for stopping by today. I hope you enjoyed your time in the library. Please let me know what books you have finished recently or are in the middle of. And you don't have to give like a super long description of them, but just like a simple yes or no, would you recommend it if you have finished it? Or like a simple yes or no on whether or not you plan on continuing the book that you're currently on, or like no, you think you're gonna DNF the book. And I'm just curious to see what you have checked out from the library. So yeah, but I will be back another day. Thanks again for stopping by, and I will see you sometime soon. Bye.